The cop called him a nobody, never imagining he was the Mafia boss. The rain hammered the cobblestones of Chicago's South Side like bullets from heaven, each drop exploding into 1,000 smaller fragments that caught the amber glow of the street lamps. Detective Michael O'Malley pulled his coat tighter around his shoulders as he stepped out of the black Ford, his weathered boots splashing through puddles that reflected the neon signs of speakeasies and gambling dens. The year was 1925, and the city was a powder keg of ambition, desperation, and illegal liquor. Another body in the warehouse district, his partner, Detective Tony Ricci, muttered through the cigarette dangling from his lips. Third one this month. These Italian families are getting bolder. O'Malley nodded grimly, his pale Irish features set in concentration. At 42, he'd seen enough of Chicago's underbelly to know that every corpse told a story, and every story led deeper into the web of corruption that strangled the city like ivy on a dying tree. The warehouse ahead loomed like a cathedral of commerce, its brick walls stained black with soot and time. Inside, the scene was typical of a gang execution, one bullet to the back of the head, the victim's expensive suit now a canvas for blood and brain matter. But what caught O'Malley's attention wasn't the corpse. It was the man sitting quietly on a wooden crate in the corner, his hands folded in his lap like a schoolboy waiting for dismissal. He was unremarkable in every way that mattered to a cop's trained eye. Medium height, maybe 5'8", with the kind of soft features that suggested he'd never thrown a punch in anger. His clothes were clean but cheap, a brown wool coat that had seen better decades, scuffed leather shoes, and a cap pulled low over dark eyes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Everything about him screamed working-class nobody. "You!" O'Malley barked, striding over with the confidence of a man who'd interrogated 1,000 suspects. "What's your name?" "Vincent Torino," the man replied softly, his voice carrying the faint accent of someone who'd learned English as a second language. "I work in the fish market on Halsted." O'Malley pulled out his notepad, licking the tip of his pencil. "Yeah, and what's a fish seller doing in a warehouse full of dead gangsters?" Vincent's shoulders rose in a small shrug. "I was walking home from work, heard the gunshot, came to see if someone needed help. Found him like this and was waiting for the police." The detective snorted. In his experience, innocent bystanders didn't stick around crime scenes. They ran like their pants were on fire. But something about this Vincent Torino struck him as genuinely harmless. Maybe it was the way he kept his hands visible, or how his eyes never quite met O'Malley's stare. Classic signs of a man who'd learned to be invisible. "Listen here, nobody," O'Malley said, using the tone he reserved for the city's forgotten masses. "This ain't your neighborhood social club. People who stick their noses where they don't belong end up like our friend over there." He jerked his thumb toward the corpse. "You understand me?" Vincent nodded quickly. "Yes, sir. I understand." "Good. Now give me your address and get lost before I decide you know more than you're letting on." As Vincent rattled off an address in Little Italy, O'Malley scribbled it down without really listening. Another nobody caught in the crossfire of Chicago's gang wars. The city was full of them, immigrants who worked honest jobs, kept their heads down, and prayed their children would have better lives. They were invisible to men like O'Malley, part of the scenery like fire hydrants and street signs. After Vincent left, shuffling out into the rain like a beaten dog, O'Malley turned his attention back to the real mystery. Who had executed Tommy the Fish, Benedetto, and why? The victim had been a small-time numbers runner for the Torelli family, hardly important enough to warrant such dramatic attention. But as the detective worked the scene, collecting evidence and interviewing witnesses, he couldn't shake the memory of Vincent Torino's eyes. There had been something there, beneath the surface of meek submission, a flicker of something that reminded O'Malley uncomfortably of the look he'd seen in the eyes of truly dangerous men. 3 blocks away, Vincent Torino walked through the rain without hurrying. His soft leather shoes, which O'Malley had dismissed as scuffed and cheap, were actually handmade in Italy and cost more than the detective made in a month. The working man's coat concealed a suit tailored on Savile Row, and the hands folded so carefully in his lap bore calluses not from handling fish, but from years of piano lessons that had taught him precision and patience. As he turned down a narrow alley, 3 men stepped out of the shadows. They wore expensive overcoats and the kind of hats that marked them as serious people in serious business. "How did it go, Don Torino?" asked the tallest. A man with shoulders like a dock worker and scars that spoke of violence survived. Vincent, or rather Don Vincent Torino, head of the most powerful crime family in Chicago, allowed himself a small smile. The detective thinks I'm nobody, Sal. Just another immigrant trying to stay invisible? And Tommy made his peace with God, I hope. He thought he could skim from our operations and blame it on the Irish. Now he knows better. The three men fell into step behind their boss as he walked deeper into the maze of alleys that honeycombed Little Italy. Here, in streets that never appeared on official maps, Vincent Torino was anything but nobody. He was the Shadow King of Chicago, the man who decided which ships unloaded their illegal cargo, which politicians stayed bought, and which rivals lived to see another sunrise. But Detective O'Malley would never know that. To him, Vincent would always be just another nobody, exactly the way Vincent preferred it. The rain continued to fall, washing the blood from the warehouse floor and carrying the secrets of the city toward Lake Michigan, where they would rest in the dark water alongside all the other truths that Chicago preferred to forget. The morning sun struggled through the grimy windows of the 12th District Police Station, casting long shadows across Detective O'Malley's cluttered desk. Coffee had gone cold in his chipped mug hours ago, but he barely noticed as he spread crime scene photographs across the scarred wooden surface. Tommy the Fish. Benedetto's lifeless eyes stared up at him from black and white images that captured every detail of his violent end. "You're looking at this all wrong, Mike," Detective Ricci said, perching on the edge of the desk with a fresh cup of coffee steaming in his hands. "This isn't about Tommy. He was small time, a minnow. Someone used him to send a message." O'Malley rubbed his tired eyes. After 20 years on the force, he'd developed an instinct for when cases would turn complicated, and every fiber of his being was screaming warnings. Message to who? The Torellis? They're practically extinct since Prohibition started. Most of their muscle either went legitimate or joined bigger families. Maybe that's the point, Ricci mused. Maybe someone's cleaning house, tying up loose ends. The detective pulled out his notepad and flipped to his scrawled notes from the previous night. Vincent Torino, fish market worker, Halstead Street. The address placed him squarely in Little Italy, in the heart of territory that had once belonged to the old families before the Irish and Jewish gangs had muscled in on the liquor trade. "I want to talk to that witness again," O'Malley announced, standing and reaching for his coat. Something about him didn't sit right. The ride to Little Italy took them through streets that told the story of Chicago's transformation. Irish neighborhoods gave way to Italian ones, the architecture shifting from austere Catholic churches to more ornate structures that spoke of Mediterranean heritage. The smell of garlic and olive oil competed with the ever-present aroma of coal smoke and automobile exhaust. Halstead Street bustled with morning commerce. Fish vendors called out their wares in rapid Italian, their voices creating a musical backdrop to the clatter of horse-drawn carts and the occasional honk of motor vehicles. O'Malley found the fish market easily enough, a narrow storefront wedged between a bakery and a shop selling religious artifacts. Inside, the smell of fresh fish was overwhelming. Ice-filled displays showcased the morning's catch from Lake Michigan, and behind the counter stood a burly man with forearms like tree trunks, expertly filleting a large salmon. "I'm looking for Vincent Torino," O'Malley announced, flashing his badge. The fish seller's knife paused mid-cut. "Vincent? He no work today. Is Tuesday. He take off Tuesday and Wednesday, work weekend instead. Where can I find him?" A shrug that suggested the man knew less than nothing about his employee's personal life. Maybe home, maybe church. Vincent? He very quiet man, keep to himself. O'Malley left his card and walked back onto the street, but instead of returning to his car immediately, he decided to canvass the neighborhood. Something about Vincent Torino nagged at him like a splinter under the skin. At the bakery next door, the elderly woman behind the counter crossed herself when he mentioned Vincent's name. "Such a good boy," she said in heavily accented English. "Always polite, always pay on time. His mama, God rest her soul, she raise him right. How long has he lived in the neighborhood?" "Oh, long time, since he was small boy. His papa bring family from Sicily before the war." The religious shop provided similar testimony. Vincent was described as devout, quiet, respectful, the kind of man who attended mass regularly, helped elderly neighbors with their shopping, and never caused trouble. A model citizen of Little Italy's close-knit community. But as O'Malley walked deeper into the neighborhood's narrow streets, he began to notice things that his trained eye couldn't ignore. Despite the apparent poverty of the area, many of the buildings showed signs of recent renovation. New roofs, fresh paint, modern plumbing fixtures visible through open windows. Someone was investing money in Little Italy. Serious money. He also noticed the men standing on street corners, ostensibly reading newspapers or chatting with friends, but positioned in ways that provided clear sight lines down multiple streets. Their clothes were too expensive for the neighborhood, their postures too alert. They had the look of soldiers, not the kind who marched in formation, but the kind who fought in alleys and back rooms. When O'Malley made eye contact with one of them, the man touched his hat brim in acknowledgement but made no move to approach or flee. Confident. Professional. The detective had seen that attitude before in veterans of Chicago's gang wars. "Excuse me," O'Malley called to the man, crossing the street with purposeful strides. "Yes, officer." The reply was carefully neutral, delivered with a slight Italian accent. "I'm investigating a murder that happened last night. Warehouse District. You hear anything about it?" The man's face showed polite confusion. "No, sir. I mind my own business. Work at the dock. Come home to my family. Don't know nothing about murders." It was a perfectly reasonable response, delivered with just the right amount of concern and helpfulness. But something in the man's eyes reminded O'Malley of Vincent Torino's expression the night before, a careful blankness that suggested depths beneath the surface. "What's your name?" "Salvatore Mancuso. I load ships down at Navy Pier." O'Malley made a note of the name, knowing he'd check it against employment records later. "You know Vincent Torino, works at the fish market." "Vincent, sure, I know Vincent, good man. Very quiet. Why you ask about him?" "He was a witness to the crime scene. Just following up." Salvatore nodded sympathetically. "Vincent, he probably tried to help. That's the kind of man he is, but he don't know nothing about violence. He sell fish, go to church, take care of his old aunt. Simple life." As O'Malley walked away, he felt the weight of being watched. Not threatening, but thorough, professional. The kind of surveillance that suggested organization and resources far beyond what a neighborhood of fish sellers and dock workers should possess. Back at the station, he ran Salvatore Mancuso through the system and found exactly what he expected. A clean record, steady employment, no arrests. Too clean for a man who carried himself like he'd seen violence up close. The pieces of the puzzle were there, scattered across his desk like fragments of a broken mirror. Tommy Benedetto, executed with professional precision. Vincent Torino, the perfectly forgettable witness who somehow ended up at a crime scene. Little Italy, a neighborhood that felt like it was being watched by invisible eyes. And somewhere in the shadows, pulling strings that O'Malley couldn't yet see, was someone smart enough to hide in plain sight while orchestrating moves in Chicago's deadly chess game. The detective poured himself another cup of coffee and stared at the crime scene photographs. Tommy, the fish, had been killed for a reason, and that reason was connected to the quiet man who claimed to sell fish for a living. O'Malley just had to figure out how. The amber light of evening painted Chicago's streets in shades of gold and shadow, as Vincent Torino made his way through the labyrinthine alleys of Little Italy. To any observer, he appeared to be exactly what he claimed, a tired working man heading home after another day at the fish market, his shoulders slightly stooped, his gait unhurried. But beneath this carefully cultivated facade, Vincent's mind operated with the precision of a Swiss timepiece, cataloging every detail of his surroundings. He'd noticed Detective O'Malley's return to the neighborhood that afternoon. Word traveled fast in Little Italy, carried by a network of eyes and ears that had been generations in the making. Mrs. Benedetto at the bakery had mentioned the detective's questions about Vincent's character. Salvatore had reported their brief conversation near the corner of Taylor and Aberdeen. Even Father DeMarco at St. Mary of the Angels had discreetly inquired about whether Vincent needed spiritual guidance in dealing with the police. The beauty of the system Vincent had spent 15 years building was its invisibility. To outsiders, Little Italy appeared to be exactly what it had always been, a close-knit community of Italian immigrants who worked honest jobs, attended Mass faithfully, and minded their own business. But beneath this veneer of normalcy operated one of the most sophisticated criminal organizations in America. Vincent turned down a narrow alley between two tenement buildings, their brick facades blackened by decades of coal smoke and industrial grime. Halfway down, he stopped at an unremarkable door marked only with the number 47. His knock followed a specific pattern: 2 quick raps, a pause, then 3 more. The door opened immediately, revealing a young man whose expensive suit contrasted sharply with the alley's squalid appearance. "Don Torino," the man said, stepping aside with a respectful bow of his head. Vincent entered what appeared to be a modest apartment, complete with the kind of furniture that suggested a family of limited means. But appearances, as Vincent had learned long ago, were tools to be wielded like weapons. He walked to a bookshelf lined with volumes of Italian poetry and pressed a hidden mechanism behind a leather-bound copy of Dante's Inferno. The entire shelf swung inward, revealing a passage that led to the building's basement. The transformation was immediate and startling. What had been a typical tenement basement had been converted into something resembling a gentleman's club from London's Pall Mall. Rich mahogany paneling covered the walls, Persian rugs softened the concrete floor, and crystal decanters filled with genuine Scottish whiskey, not the rotgut that passed for liquor in most speakeasies, sat on a sideboard that had cost more than most people earned in a year. 6 men rose as Vincent entered, their movements synchronized with the respect born of absolute loyalty. These were not the crude thugs that populated most of Chicago's gangs. Each had been carefully selected for specific skills that went far beyond the ability to break legs and collect debts. "Gentlemen," Vincent said, settling into a leather chair that had been positioned to command a view of the entire room. "We have a problem." Salvatore Mancuso, who had shed his dockworker's clothes for an immaculately tailored suit, spoke first. "The Irish detective is asking questions. My sources in the police department say he's specifically focused on you." "Detective O'Malley is thorough," Vincent acknowledged. "Perhaps too thorough for his own good. What do we know about him?" Marco Rossellini, a thin man whose appearance belied his reputation as Chicago's most skilled forger, consulted a leather portfolio. Michael Patrick O'Malley, age 42, 20 years with the Chicago Police Department, married to Catherine Mary Sullivan, one daughter named Margaret, age 16, lives at 1247 North Ashland Avenue, clean record, no gambling debts, doesn't drink excessively, considered incorruptible by his peers. Vincent nodded thoughtfully. Incorruptible men were both admirable and dangerous. They couldn't be bought, which made them unpredictable. Family background: Irish Catholic, obviously. Father was a police officer who died in the line of duty when O'Malley was 12. Mother took in laundry to support the family. O'Malley worked as a newspaper boy and dock laborer before joining the police. Classic American success story. The information painted a picture of a man driven by duty and honor, exactly the kind of opponent Vincent preferred to avoid. Such men were difficult to predict because their motivations couldn't be reduced to simple greed or ambition. "Angelo," Vincent said, turning to a heavy-set man whose scarred knuckles told their own story. "What's the word on the street about Tommy's death?" Angelo Vitelli had grown up with Vincent in these same streets, but where Vincent had learned subtlety and patience, Angelo had perfected violence as an art form. The other families think it was territorial. Word is the Irish are trying to muscle into our numbers rackets, using Tommy's skimming as an excuse. Good. Let them think that. What about our police contacts? Sergeant Murphy owes us enough favors to keep us informed, but he can't control what O'Malley does. The detective has a reputation for following his own instincts. Vincent steepled his fingers, a gesture that his lieutenants recognized as a sign of deep concentration. The empire he'd built over 15 years had succeeded because it operated according to rules that his competitors never understood. While other gangs fought bloody wars in the streets, drawing unwanted attention from law enforcement and the press, Vincent had chosen a different path. His organization never dealt directly in violence. They subcontracted such unpleasantries to freelance operators who couldn't be traced back to Little Italy. They never operated flashy speakeasies that attracted attention. Instead, they controlled the supply chains that kept other people's establishments stocked with quality liquor. Most importantly, they never appeared to be what they actually were. "The detective's investigation threatens everything we've built," Vincent said finally. "Not because he suspects the truth. That would actually be easier to manage, but because his thoroughness might uncover details that lead others to ask the right questions. We could arrange for him to be transferred, suggested Marco. I have contacts in City Hall who owe favors. Vincent shook his head. Too obvious. A clean detective suddenly transferred after investigating a murder in Little Italy? That raises more questions than it answers. What about making him look corrupt? Angelo offered. Plant some evidence, make it appear he's been taking money, destroys his credibility. Again, Vincent declined. Michael O'Malley has spent 20 years building a reputation for honesty. Destroying that reputation would require evidence so overwhelming that no one would believe it appeared naturally. The very impossibility of his corruption is what makes him dangerous to us. The room fell silent as Vincent considered his options. In the chess game of Chicago politics and crime, he had always preferred moves that appeared harmless while achieving strategic objectives. Direct confrontation was for men who lacked imagination. Gentlemen, he said finally, I believe it's time for Vincent Torino the fish seller to become more interesting to Detective O'Malley, but not in the way he expects. He outlined his plan in broad strokes, watching as understanding dawned on his lieutenants or faces. It was elegant in its simplicity and devastating in its potential effectiveness. Within a week, Detective O'Malley would find himself facing a case that would challenge everything he thought he knew about crime in Chicago, and Vincent Torino would remain exactly what he appeared to be, a nobody who sold fish for a living. The meeting concluded with the efficiency that marked all of Vincent's operations. Each man knew his role, understood the timeline, and accepted the consequences of failure. As they filed out through the hidden passage, returning to their public lives as dock workers, shopkeepers, and craftsmen, Vincent remained in his chair, contemplating the delicate balance between revelation and concealment that had kept him alive and prosperous for so long. Outside, Chicago's streets pulsed with the rhythms of a city that never truly slept. But in the hidden heart of Little Italy, Don Vincent Torino sat motionless in his leather chair, planning moves in a game that Detective O'Malley didn't even know he was playing. Detective O'Malley's investigation had taken on the momentum of an avalanche, gathering evidence and suspicion with each passing day. What had begun as a routine murder case now consumed his thoughts like a fever. He'd filled 3 notebooks with observations, interviews, and theories, each page bringing him closer to a truth that remained frustratingly out of reach. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, his 16-year-old daughter Margaret. Papa, you've been working awful late these nights, she said over breakfast, her green eyes, so much like her mother's, filled with concern. Mama's worried you're not eating proper. O'Malley looked up from the newspaper he'd been reading without comprehension, his mind still puzzling over the inconsistencies in Vincent Torino's story. Just a difficult case, sweetheart. Nothing for you to worry about. Is it about that Italian neighborhood? Tommy Benedetto mentioned you've been asking questions around Little Italy. The detective's coffee cup stopped halfway to his lips. Tommy who? Tommy Benedetto. He delivers ice to Mrs. Patterson next door. Nice boy. Always tips his cap when he sees me walking to school. O'Malley set down his cup with careful precision. Margaret, what exactly did this Tommy tell you? His daughter's forehead creased in concentration. Well, he said his cousin got himself killed, and now the police are stirring up trouble for honest folks. Said his whole family's nervous because detectives keep asking about some fish seller named Vincent. The coincidence struck O'Malley like a physical blow. He'd never mentioned Vincent Torino's name outside the police station, yet somehow word had reached the Italian community with enough detail to identify both the victim and the key witness. In 20 years of police work, he'd learned that such leaks usually meant one of 2 things. Either someone in the department was talking, or someone was watching his investigation very closely. That afternoon, O'Malley decided to test a theory. Instead of his usual direct approach, he parked 3 blocks from Little Italy and walked through the neighborhood along a route he'd never taken before, stopping at businesses he'd previously ignored. At a small grocery store on Aberdeen Street, he struck up a conversation with the elderly proprietor about the rising cost of vegetables. Within 10 minutes, the man had casually mentioned that poor Vincent from the fish market had been questioned by police about some terrible business he'd witnessed. At a barber shop 2 blocks away, while getting his monthly trim, O'Malley listened to gossip about how the neighborhood's young men were being harassed by detectives who didn't understand that honest immigrants just wanted to work and raise their families. Vincent Torino's name came up twice, both times spoken with sympathy for a good man caught in unfortunate circumstances. By evening, O'Malley had visited 8 different establishments, and in every single one, Vincent Torino had been mentioned without prompting. The coordination was too perfect to be coincidental, yet too subtle to be obvious manipulation. Someone was managing the narrative about Vincent with the skill of a master strategist. The realization that he was being watched and managed filled O'Malley with a cold fury that reminded him why he'd become a police officer in the first place. Criminals who thought they could manipulate law enforcement had always triggered his most determined instincts. That night, instead of going home to his family, O'Malley parked across from Vincent Torino's listed address and settled in for surveillance. The building was typical of Little Italy's tenements, 4 stories of weathered brick housing families who worked hard for modest wages. Vincent lived in apartment 3B, according to the mailboxes in the lobby. For 3 hours, O'Malley watched the building's entrance. Residents came and went, factory workers heading to night shifts, mothers returning from late shopping, children playing stickball in the narrow street despite the evening chill. Normal neighborhood life in all its mundane complexity. At 11:30 p.m., Vincent Torino finally appeared, walking down the sidewalk with the measured pace of a man tired from an honest day's work. He wore the same brown coat O'Malley remembered from the warehouse, his cap pulled low, his hands deep in his pockets. Everything about his appearance reinforced the image of a simple laborer heading home to a modest apartment. But as O'Malley watched, something unusual happened. Vincent paused at the building's entrance and glanced directly at the detective's car. Not a casual look, a specific knowing glance that lasted exactly long enough to establish eye contact before Vincent disappeared into the building. The message was clear. I know you're watching me. 5 minutes later, a light appeared in a third-floor window that O'Malley assumed belonged to apartment 3B. The silhouette that briefly appeared in the window waved, a small, almost friendly gesture that somehow felt more threatening than any overt menace. O'Malley started his car and drove home through streets that suddenly felt less familiar than they had that morning. For the first time in his career, he had the unsettling sensation that his investigation was being investigated, that every move he made was anticipated by an opponent who remained invisible. The next morning brought news that crystallized his suspicions into certainty. Sergeant Murphy called him into his office before the day shift had officially begun, his usually jovial expression replaced by bureaucratic concern. Mike, I've got orders from downtown. The Benedetto case is being transferred to the federal boys. O'Malley felt his world shift sideways. What? Why? Word is it involves interstate liquor smuggling, federal jurisdiction. You know how these things work, but O'Malley knew how these things really worked. Federal involvement usually meant political pressure, and political pressure usually meant money changing hands in the shadowy spaces where crime and government intersected. Someone with serious influence wanted him off the case. When? He asked. Today, FBI agent Morrison will be here this afternoon to collect your files. O'Malley nodded and returned to his desk, but his mind was racing. In 20 years of police work, he'd learned to recognize the difference between legitimate law enforcement and the kind of maneuvering that protected criminal interests. The timing was too convenient, the justification too thin. Someone had made a phone call. Someone with enough power to reach into the police department and redirect a murder investigation. Someone who understood that Detective O'Malley was getting too close to something important. As he sat at his desk, staring at 3 notebooks full of evidence he'd never be allowed to pursue, O'Malley made a decision that would define the rest of his career. He carefully copied the most important details from his investigation into a separate notebook, which he slipped into his coat pocket when no one was watching. Vincent Torino might have won this round, but the game was far from over. O'Malley had 20 years of experience hunting criminals who thought they were smarter than the law, and he'd learned that patience was often more effective than authority. If Vincent wanted to play chess, O'Malley was ready to learn the rules. That afternoon, he handed over his official files to Agent Morrison with professional courtesy and bureaucratic compliance, but in his coat pocket, the copied notebook felt like a loaded weapon waiting for the right moment to be drawn. The hunt was about to become much more personal, 2 months had passed since the FBI had officially closed the Tommy Benedetto case, filing it away as another casualty of Chicago's ongoing gang wars. Agent Morrison had conducted a perfunctory investigation that concluded Tommy had been killed by Irish bootleggers attempting to expand their territory, a neat explanation that satisfied bureaucratic requirements while protecting more complex truths. But Detective O'Malley had not forgotten, and more importantly, he had not stopped investigating. Working alone, using vacation days and personal time, he'd methodically constructed a picture of Vincent Torino that bore no resemblance to the humble fish seller who had sat so quietly in that warehouse 2 months ago. The man O'Malley now understood to be the true Vincent Torino was perhaps the most sophisticated criminal he'd ever encountered, and certainly the most dangerous. The key breakthrough had come from an unlikely source: immigration records at Ellis Island. O'Malley had taken a weekend trip to New York, ostensibly to visit his sister, but actually to dig through archives that most investigators never bothered to examine. What he found there shattered every assumption he'd made about Vincent's background. According to official records, Vincenzo Torino had arrived from Sicily in 1903 as a 7-year-old boy with his parents and 2 sisters, but careful examination of the ship's manifest revealed something interesting. Young Vincenzo had traveled first class, not steerage like most immigrant children. His father's listed occupation was businessman, not the farmer that appeared in Chicago police records years later. More telling were the financial records O'Malley had uncovered through patient research at banks throughout Chicago. Vincent Torino's modest apartment was paid for by a trust that traced back to a Sicilian olive oil company, a company that, according to international shipping records, had never exported a single bottle of olive oil to America. The fish market where Vincent claimed to work was owned by a corporation whose board of directors included 2 men who had served prison sentences for extortion, 1 suspected murderer who had never been successfully prosecuted, and a lawyer who specialized in defending organized crime figures. But the most damning evidence was also the most subtle: patterns of behavior that revealed themselves only through months of careful observation. O'Malley had noticed that whenever Vincent appeared in public, other men in the neighborhood became more alert. Conversations stopped when he passed. Children were called inside by mothers who suddenly remembered urgent household tasks. These were not the reactions of a community to one of their own. They were the reactions of subjects to their king. On a gray November morning, with winter's first snow beginning to dust Chicago's streets, O'Malley made his decision. He would confront Vincent Torino directly, armed with enough evidence to shatter the carefully constructed illusion that had protected one of America's most successful crime bosses. He found Vincent exactly where he expected to, working behind the counter at the fish market on Halsted Street, filleting salmon with the practiced movements of a man who had learned to make even skilled labor appear effortless. "Mr. Torino," O'Malley said, his voice carrying the authority of a man who no longer had anything to lose. "We need to talk." Vincent looked up with the same mild, slightly puzzled expression he'd worn in the warehouse. "Detective O'Malley, I thought the federal agent said the case was closed." "The case is closed. This isn't about the case anymore." Vincent set down his filleting knife and wiped his hands on a blood-stained apron. "I don't understand." "I think you understand perfectly. In fact, I think you understand more about what happens in this city than anyone gives you credit for." O'Malley pulled out his notebook, the copied one he'd kept hidden for 2 months. "For instance, I think you understand why Tommy Benedetto was really killed." Something flickered in Vincent's eyes, so briefly that most people would have missed it. But O'Malley had spent 2 months learning to read this man's face. "I think you also understand," O'Malley continued, "why federal agents suddenly developed an interest in a routine murder investigation. And I think you understand why 3 separate banks hold accounts in your name totaling more than most people earn in a lifetime." Vincent's expression didn't change, but his hands stilled completely, the first genuinely unconscious reaction O'Malley had ever seen from him. "Detective, I think you've been working too hard. These are serious accusations with no basis in Don Torino." The 2 words hung in the air between them like a physical presence. O'Malley watched as Vincent's carefully constructed mask finally slipped, revealing for just an instant the calculating intelligence that had built a criminal empire while hiding in plain sight. "I don't know what you're talking about," Vincent said, but the words carried no conviction. "I know exactly what you are," O'Malley said quietly. "The question is, what are you going to do about it?" For a long moment, the two men stared at each other across the fish-stained counter. Around them, the market continued its normal operations, customers haggling over prices, vendors calling out their wares in rapid Italian. But in their small corner of the world, detective and crime boss were finally meeting as equals. Vincent reached beneath the counter, and for a heartbeat O'Malley tensed, his hand moving toward his service revolver. But what Vincent pulled out was not a weapon, it was a business card, cream-colored stock with elegant engraving. "If you ever decide that your talents might be better compensated in the private sector," Vincent said, his voice now carrying subtle traces of authority that had been completely absent before, "please don't hesitate to call." O'Malley looked at the card. V. Torino, Import-Export Consulting. No address, just a telephone number. "I'm not for sale," O'Malley said. "Neither am I, detective. That's why we understand each other." Vincent returned to his work, picking up the filleting knife with movements that now seemed less like those of a laborer and more like those of a surgeon. Precise, controlled, deadly when necessary. "You have a choice to make, detective," Vincent said without looking up from the fish he was preparing. "You can continue this investigation that will ultimately lead nowhere, or you can accept that some truths are more dangerous than the lies they replace." O'Malley pocketed the business card, his mind already working through the implications. He'd found his quarry, but capturing him would require more than evidence. It would require a fundamental change in how Chicago's power structure operated. "This isn't over," O'Malley said. Vincent finally looked up, and for the first time since their confrontation began, he smiled, an expression that was neither warm nor threatening, but something far more unsettling, genuinely amused. "Detective, it never started. Tommy Benedetto was killed by Irish bootleggers trying to expand their territory. The federal investigation confirmed this. Case closed." His voice returned to its previous mild tone, but now O'Malley could hear the steel beneath the silk. "As for Vincent Torino, he's just a man who sells fish and minds his own business. Nothing more, nothing less." O'Malley turned to leave, but Vincent's voice stopped him at the door. "Detective, your daughter Margaret. She's applying to universities, isn't she? Bright girl. It would be a shame if anything interfered with her education." The threat was delivered in the same tone Vincent might have used to comment on the weather, but it landed with the impact of a physical blow. O'Malley's hand moved to his revolver, but he stopped himself. They were in public, surrounded by witnesses who would swear that the fish seller had done nothing but offer friendly conversation to a visiting police officer. "You stay away from my family," O'Malley said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I would never dream of bothering your family, detective. I'm simply observing that Chicago can be a dangerous city for young people who don't have proper protection. Fortunately, most neighborhoods have men who look out for the community's welfare." The message was crystal clear. Vincent's organization extended far beyond Little Italy, and O'Malley's family lived within reach of that extended influence. But the genius of the threat was its deniability. Vincent had offered protection, not menace, couched in language that could be interpreted as civic-minded concern. O'Malley left the fish market with the bitter taste of defeat in his mouth. He'd found Chicago's most successful crime boss, gathered evidence that proved Vincent Torino was far more than he appeared to be, and discovered that none of it mattered. Vincent operated in a realm where conventional law enforcement was not just ineffective, but actively counterproductive. That evening, sitting in his kitchen while his wife Catherine prepared dinner and Margaret studied at the table, O'Malley stared at Vincent's business card and contemplated the nature of justice in a city where the most dangerous criminals were also the most invisible. 3 weeks later, Detective Michael O'Malley submitted his resignation from the Chicago Police Department, citing a desire to spend more time with his family. His colleagues threw him a farewell party at Murphy's Tavern, where they toasted his 20 years of service and speculated about his plans for civilian life. What they didn't know was that O'Malley had taken a job with a private security firm that specialized in protecting wealthy businessmen from the kind of threats that the police couldn't officially acknowledge. The firm was owned by a man named V. Torino, whose import-on-export business had grown remarkably successful in recent years. On his first day of work, O'Malley reported to an office above a legitimate import company in downtown Chicago. The space was elegant, but understated, with windows that provided commanding views of the city's commercial district. Behind a mahogany desk that probably cost more than a police officer's annual salary sat Vincent Torino, dressed in a suit that had definitely not come from any rack accessible to fish sellers. "Detective, or should I say, Mr. O'Malley, welcome to the private sector," Vincent said, rising to shake hands with his newest employee. "I'm not here because I like you," O'Malley said bluntly. "I'm here because you made it clear that refusing wasn't really an option." "I respect honesty," Vincent replied. "It's a rare quality in my line of work. Your job is simple: keep me alive and keep my business operations secure from threats that law enforcement can't or won't address. And in return, you'll earn more in a year than you made in 5 as a police officer. Your daughter's education will be fully funded at whatever university she chooses. And your family will enjoy the kind of protection that money can't buy, but influence can provide." O'Malley looked out the window at the city he'd served for 20 years, watching the endless stream of automobiles and pedestrians moving through streets where justice was just another commodity to be bought and sold. "What exactly am I protecting you from?" he asked. Vincent's smile was enigmatic. "Other people like me, Mr. O'Malley. Chicago is a competitive city, and success always breeds resentment. The difference between those other people and me is that I prefer subtlety to violence, business to bloodshed. My enemies tend to be less philosophical in their approach." Over the following months, O'Malley learned that Vincent's assessment was entirely accurate. His new job involved neutralizing threats from rival organizations, corrupt politicians who had developed inconvenient scruples, and federal agents whose investigations came too close to exposing operations that were better left undisturbed. His first major assignment had been elegant in its simplicity, preventing a rival family's attempt to assassinate Vincent during a supposedly legitimate business meeting. Using police methodology and surveillance techniques, O'Malley had identified the threat 3 days in advance and neutralized it without a single shot being fired, simply by ensuring that certain people received anonymous tips about planned criminal activity in time to make arrests that had nothing to do with Vincent. The work was morally complex in ways that straightforward police work had never been, but O'Malley discovered that protecting an honest criminal from dishonest law enforcement involved the same skills he'd developed as a detective, just applied from a different angle. More surprisingly, he found himself developing a grudging respect for Vincent's methods. The man who had once seemed like Chicago's most dangerous criminal was actually one of its most stabilizing influences. Under Vincent's quiet management, Little Italy had the lowest crime rate in the city. Neighborhood businesses thrived, children walked safely to school, and elderly residents felt secure in their homes. Vincent achieved through careful organization and strategic thinking what the police had never accomplished through force and authority: actual order in a chaotic city. 6 months after joining Vincent's organization, O'Malley sat in the same chair where he'd first learned the truth about his employer's identity. Across the mahogany desk, Vincent was reviewing reports from various legitimate businesses that served as fronts for less legitimate activities. "Do you ever regret it?" O'Malley asked. "Living a lie, I mean. Always pretending to be someone you're not." Vincent looked up from his paperwork, considering the question with the seriousness he brought to all philosophical inquiries. "I've never pretended to be anyone, Mr. O'Malley. Vincent Torino, who sells fish, and Vincent Torino, who runs this organization, are the same person. The only difference is context." That's a hell of a way to look at it. It's an honest way to look at it. I am exactly who I appear to be: a man who takes care of his community, protects his family, and conducts business according to principles that value loyalty over law. The fish market isn't a disguise, it's simply another aspect of who I am. O'Malley nodded slowly, understanding for the first time why Vincent had been so successful at remaining invisible. He wasn't hiding behind a false identity. He was living multiple true identities simultaneously, each authentic within its appropriate context. Besides, Vincent added with the slight smile that O'Malley had learned to interpret as genuine amusement, the fish market is quite profitable. Amazing what people will pay for genuinely fresh salmon. Outside the office windows, Chicago continued its eternal dance of ambition and corruption, hope and despair. But in the quiet spaces between what appeared to be true and what actually was true, Vincent Torino continued to prove that the most dangerous criminals were often the ones who never looked criminal at all. And Detective Michael O'Malley, former upholder of law and order, current protector of organized crime, had learned that justice in Chicago was less about right and wrong than about understanding the difference between what the system claimed to be and what it actually was. In the end, Vincent had been right about one thing. Some truths were more dangerous than the lies they replaced, but some lies, O'Malley had discovered, were more honest than the truths they concealed. The cop had called him a nobody, never imagining he was the Mafia boss. But perhaps the real revelation was that everyone, cop and criminal alike, was both nobody and somebody, depending on who was doing the looking and what they expected to see. Chicago, as Vincent had taught him, the most important skill wasn't avoiding detection, it was controlling perception. And perception, like everything else in the city, was just another commodity to be bought, sold, and carefully managed by those who understood its true value.